Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the React Native Radio Podcast. Episode 298, Create Expo Stack, NativeWind UI, and Plugin Pro with Dan Stepanov.
Hello all. As you've noticed, I'm not Jamin or Robin, but I have a cool episode lined up for you all, so sit in and listen. As you know by now, I live in Durham, North Carolina with my wife and toddler. I'm a former pro soccer player and coach, and a senior React Native engineer here at Infinite Red. I'm joined by Dan Stepanov, who you all might know on Twitter as Only Dans. Hey Dan, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Can't complain. Getting hot over here on the East Coast, for sure.
Oh yeah. Very warm. Very, very warm. I slept in a barn last night, actually, and that was quite frigid, but then I stepped outside and it was beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dan is a chemical engineer turned software engineer. He's the author of Create Expo Stack and has been working on mobile development for over 10 years, working with React Native and Expo since they came on the scene. He lives in Santa Monica, California, currently on the East Coast though, and spends most of his free time riding motorcycles.
That's true.
Yeah, you like motorcycles?
I particularly like really old motorcycles because I like anything that forces me to be present. I have a lot of trouble being present. And so like motorcycles are very involved, especially the older ones. So anything that allows me to focus in on what I'm actively doing, in this case, shifting gears, the road, all that jazz, it's just so refreshing. And there's nothing digital about it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense too. Why I have a note in here that says free time riding motorcycles a lot older than him, which is kind of why I omitted that because I wasn't exactly sure what it meant, but now that all makes sense.
So my daily driver, if you can call it that, is from like 1979, you know?
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So quite a bit older than me.
Cool. There's something about California and motorcycles. A good friend from high school who lives in California loves riding motorcycles too. So maybe it's a West Coast thing. Who knows?
The vistas out there, man. There's you want to have a good time, just take a bike out to Monterey or even the Grand Canyon. There's so many things to see.
That's awesome. Cool. Before we get into this topic, let's hear from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored, as always, by Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US and Canada. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, hit us up at infinite.red/React Native. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast.
All right, let's get into our topic for today. Dan, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you currently are.
Sure. Yeah. So I spent, like you said, most of my academic career in studying chemical engineering. And midway through that, I had dabbled in computers since a pretty young age. I was really into video games and got into like modding, Game Boy Advance with like PlayStation 1 screens and stuff like this. Pretty early on, my uncle helped me build my first computer when I was 12. That really, I think, catapulted me into internet and gaming. But when I was in like high school and built, that standard graphing calculator TI-83 plus game, text-based adventure, this one kid, man, I hope I never find him, named Josh, deleted like 30 lines of it, right? Off the calculator, presumably out of sheer jealousy. And it didn't work anymore, and it turned me off to computing so much that I just didn't touch it again till college, where I discovered hackathons, or I should say they discovered me. And it appealed to me so much, this concept that almost like meritocratic, like if you just know more, there's this very strong incentive to learn, because the more you know, or if you know the most about a given topic, you become the authority in the room. And I find that hasn't really been true of anything else that I've looked into. And it definitely wasn't true of chemical engineering. So I pretty hard pivoted into that, stopped going to class, just basically went to hackathons nonstop. GPA dropped from like 3.8 to like 2.1, I think, in like 2 semesters. And yeah, like I was just really very fortunate to have the opportunities that I had, moving out to Palo Alto after college and just diving completely into software engineering. Yeah, and since 2015, then I've just been, I would say even 2014, I've been in the mobile space, right? Like Objective-C into Swift and into React Native / Expo as they came on the scene. I was even at the launch event for Expo, right? Like, and Charlie was demoing it, and I went because it's Charlie Cheever, right? He made Cora, and he demoed it and he explained it, and I went up to him and I was like, Charlie, I'm gonna be honest with you, I have no idea what you just said. Like I don't know what this is. It looks cool, but like, kind of, will you sign this for me kind of vibe. So yeah, good old Hannah House. It was over in Palo Alto. It was a good time. That's
awesome. So let's, I guess, fast forward a little bit. Tell me a little bit about how Create Expo Stack came about and what inspired you to do it.
Sure. I spent some time working with the Expo team, something within the last 2 years, I want to say. And again, just like so fortunate to have that opportunity. I posted on Twitter, I'd been teaching kids to code using Expo Stack. And I was like, hey, this could be so much better if it was collaborative, if, these features existed. And Charlie hit me up on Twitter and was like, hey, how would you like to work on that? How would you actually like to extend Snack to do those things? And I was like, I'm not qualified to do that, but sure, okay. And so that brought me into Expo. And I quickly became familiar with sort of the structure, like the management structure within Expo and how it works and how they kind of choose to prioritize certain projects. And as I was talking to who was my boss at the time, Evan Bacon, I realized I'm pretty opinionated on a lot of stuff with respect to developer tooling. And one of those things was I really wanted a lot more configuration when initializing a project, right? Mm-hmm. It occurred to me that Expo advertises as if it serves like pro developers and also like beginners. And I just didn't see that reflected in Create Expo app. So I suggested building something different, and there was pushback. So when I ultimately left Expo, I just decided to kind of build it myself. And it was super janky. I actually built it with Gluegun, which is an infinite red tool. It still uses Gluegun.
Love to see that.
Yeah. Haven't quite shifted to Bluebun yet, though, which is the bun equivalent. I don't know if Jamin is still working on that. But yeah, it got this sort of very positive response. As it turns out, people, especially advanced like Expo developers, really wanted that navigation option, that styling option. Now it's supporting EAS, state management, Zustand. I don't know. It's is making its way in. So it's sort of taken a life on of its own now. So that's been really cool to see.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think for our listeners who aren't sure what Gluegun is our internal infinite, well, not internal, it's open sourced. You can check it out on GitHub, but it's our toolkit to help you build node-based CLIs. So if you have a CLI, you can kind of use TypeScript or JavaScript, whatever you want, and it'll kind of do all that for you. And like Dan mentioned, Bluebun is the bun version of that Jamin, I believe, was messing around with at first, and he kind of pushed out the code, but I think he does plan to eventually get back to it and get that working. If not, let him know on Twitter that you want him to do it. So help him out a little bit there.
It does some other great things too. Like there's some bad patterns in Gluegun that are like, every time you import something, you import everything else. So Bluebun kind of moves away from that model. Yeah. So plenty of reasons.
Gluegun, I think, is on our radar to give some love soon. So we'll see how that goes. So back to Create Expo Stack. Tell me a little bit about what it's built on. Is it using Bun?
We use it as just sort of a package manager, not like a runtime. Like it's very nominally using Bun. I have opinions on this stuff now. Like I don't know if you've seen that meme of the one end of the graph and then the other, and it's like the bell curve, and in the middle is all the crazy tooling and the buns and the yarns and all this. And I think I'm like the more I use these tools, the more I align with that. Like I don't really care for speed. I don't care for buzzwords as much. I really care about consistency. Right now, Bun has an issue where like if you try to use anything above 1.022, it's just not going to work. And it's not really going to give you a very like intelligible reason as to why. My MO is not to figure out package managers or like node runtimes or anything. Like I just want to build my stuff. And so if I have to wait a little bit longer for that with NPM, like I'm totally okay with that. The speed aspect of these things is massively overblown in my opinion. I don't know if you guys are super about Bun or any like hot tools like that, but it's definitely starting to fade for me.
Yeah, we're still trying to find out. Like, so in our experience, we have an RNR episode about Bun and React Native, and we felt like there was still a ways to go for it, right? It's not a drop-in replacement per se, right? You don't necessarily get rid of your yarn, your NPM, your Metro, it doesn't take away all your tooling at the end of the day. You still need to use it in conjunction with something else at the end of the day. So we are optimistic that hopefully one day it could get to that level, and it does take, because its speed is amazing, right? So that's like a big value for it.
One of the things that Create Expo Stack does actually do in accordance with what we're talking about is that if you do choose Bun, it will check which version of Bun you're using locally and warn you about it, right?
Yeah.
So the likelihood that you get to the end of the installation script with whatever your configuration is and it doesn't work is highly unlikely. We keep a pretty close eye on all of this stuff. I think I just resent the fact that we even have to include that, or it's just like, oh yeah, you're not running the right version of Bun, try this version. Yeah,
that makes sense. So tell me a little bit about like a typical use case for Create Expo Stack, right? I think a lot of listeners or people that have maybe seen it just think of it as like potentially an Ignite replacement. I also do see on there that there's the -- Ignite flag. So if you could tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah. So I always wanted to pay homage to Infinite Red with Create Expo Stack, and in fact all of my other tools, which we can go into later. But with the -- Ignite flag, like Frank has helped a ton with Create Expo Stack, and so getting basically a portal over to the Infinite Red tooling, or any tooling for that matter, it always seemed like, okay, what if Create Expo Stack could serve as sort of a discovery platform, right, for the React Native Expo ecosystem? I'm still meaning to get Natter's like AI one in there as well. He has like an AI starter. But as far as use cases for Create Expo Stack, it's really interesting you asked that, because what I always intended it to be is a rapid prototyping tool. So not something that you start a whole project with. It's just something like, oh, you want to test a new library, you want to compare Restyle to Unistyle to whatever, What does the same setup look like across those different things? What it has ended up being is people very much using it, right, as their go-to way to initialize a project. And so many people did this, in fact, that I spun out an entirely new product, which I actually have to revisit, called Ship RN, in the style of sort of ship fast, right? And then I quickly realized just how much goes into, and I mean, you guys know this with your tooling, right? With Ignite, like it's a lot that goes into one of those boilerplates for when it's meant for production. And we're now moving more towards the development clients, right? So ideally, you have Create Expo Stack as the quick iteration tool. You have Ship RN as like the thing that you would use to initialize like a universal application / something meant for production. We're not quite there yet. So in the meantime, people are using Create Expo Stack for both, which is fine, I guess.
So I think just for some clarity, if I, like, as I'm working on a client project, if let's say I find a bug, or, I suspect there's a bug in one of my packages, I could easily, a use case would be using Create Expo Stack to spin up a potentially small framework app and potentially, pipe in that one package that I need, prototype it, and then use that to report my issue so that I can quickly and do it in isolation to get my issue reported so that it could get resolved while I'm still focusing on my client project and potentially not sharing any sensitive data along the way.
Correct. Yeah, it's really, it equips you for bug recreation a lot better than anything out there, because as you finish your configuration, it'll print what your total configuration is, like an object representative of your app's configuration, as well as just a CLI command, right, with flags and everything that you can pass to recreate that exact scenario, right? So you can just send that one line to somebody and they can just run it and recreate your exact situation. So assuming that is all that is required, then that's just going to be way better than anything. You can definitely go further in that direction if you want, but that's for a later time. There's so much to build.
I'm glad you said that, because an example was recently one of our clients was working on a feature, and I had worked on this feature in the past. It was the push notifications with Urban Airship. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
But we were running into issues on a separate client project I had done in the past, and I was asked to step in and kind of help resolve the issue. So I kind of took their package JSON or their configuration, used Create Expo Stack to spin up an app, which basically you had all the flags for, so leveraged all that, got my app up and running, did Urban Airship implementation, pushed that up, and then kind of shared that with the team. And then that's how they went about figuring out what their problem or their issue was. Looking at the delta in the pull request, essentially. So
yeah,
that's good to hear.
That's awesome.
I think a question I have that I think you kind of alluded to, which we at IR kind of see it with all the open source that we have. How is maintenance on something like this? Because there's a lot of flags that you have, right? So how many iterations do you have to go through to maintain all this? And it sounds like you're adding more stuff to it. So
yeah,
how does that look?
Oh man, that's such a good looking question. We have a sense internally at the moment of how most people are using it, right? So we definitely prioritize certain combos working definitively on launch. It hasn't been so bad recently. Like, for the most part, everything works as is expected. And we quickly find out if that's not the case because people use it. And, as long as you're quick to resolve the issues, then people don't really care that anything's wrong. People only care when they've been complaining for quite some time. And so the way that we're going to be preventing that longer term, though, is a more robust test suite, as well as analytics in place to truly understand, like, which things do we need, not need. And we're building out tooling that allows us to parse and format EJS files to avoid very silly, because that's actually a cause of quite a few of the problems, is this sort of generator approach that Gluegun introduces, but is the heart of Create Expo Stack.
EJS can be finicky,
at
times, unless I feel like you almost have to really understand how it works, or else it's really easy to like have a syntax error or something along the way, and then kind of trickle down effect issues.
And so for that exact reason, like, a huge first step for us was the contribution guide. Being able to just sort of divert people to the contribution guide and have them be caught up to speed very quickly on how this thing functions, including an Excalidraw diagram and all that. I highly, highly recommend that if you actually want people to go in and you want to leverage the open source community, take the time, really put in the effort for both visual and, I guess, like, people who read just to learn. Make it accessible and keep it up to date. And that's just as important as anything else, because I can't hop on a call with these people. The only other piece of advice I can give on that front is, rather than jot something down as a fix for something, record yourself doing it and just have a place where you throw that up, right? And then you have this giant directory of, ways to fix things that serve as a good example until you've documented that properly.
Your contribution guide is very, very detailed and helpful. I will say that. And I think you mentioned the Excalibur, and I was like, where is that? And I checked it out. That's very nice to have.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people can kind of look at this and kind of use it as a template almost, because you do need people to follow this, because like my question was, how do you manage all this? Because there's a lot. So your ability to get contributions that do the tests, do follow the contribution to check off all the boxes that you would, limit the work for you, and hopefully in the future make it easy to upgrade and maintain along the way.
Yeah. If at all possible, I mean, something I picked up from Charlie Cheever is like, try to write as little static documentation as possible, like as much automated, like automatically generated stuff. That's really going to be helpful. And I find that increasingly helpful as I move into my other products like NativeWind UI, where code snippets become really important. Referencing actual gists rather than having to write the code into the documentation is just way better.
Yeah, I want to get to NativeWind UI, but I have a couple more questions on Create Expo Stack. Sorry, I just love this type of tooling, so I kind of want to make sure we go through it all. Is it new architecture compatible? Like, can I turn on the flag, or do you have a flag setting?
So I don't see a reason that you shouldn't be able to, because any concern there would be shifted towards Expo predominantly. So long as Expo is compatible in whatever, like SDK 51 or something.
51, yeah.
Then you should be good. The only concern would be certain libraries not being available.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't know if you had something in there that would prevent that, because I have been looking at it a lot recently, and I think this, don't quote me on this fully, but I know Firebase right now is probably the only one looking at your list that I know off the top of my head is not compatible. So
I'm thinking about removing the Firebase Supabase stuff, actually, because one, I don't recommend using Firebase. Two, that feels like stuff that should exist in ShipRN as sort of like a more full stack thing.
Yeah.
If you're building small stuff, I've actually become a really big fan of things like SQLite and Pocketbase. I love those small self-contained storage options, and I love building within like these aggressive constraints. So we'll see kind of what the result is, but I probably won't remove Firebase Supabase until I sort of revisit ShipRN in the next like month or so.
I'm hearing a lot of people shifting to Supabase recently for RN, so I think that's something I'd want to check out. I know internally Nick Morgan, one of our developers, is working on a Ignite cookbook, so our recipe website. So how do you integrate a package or a feature in Ignite? Supabase is one of them that he's currently working on, so stay tuned for that.
Now, we take, by the way, I have to say a huge thank you to the entire Infinite Red team, and especially Frank, for Ignite even existing, right? Like, it is a huge, huge inspiration for Create Expo Stack. And you can see hints of it everywhere, right? Even just in the README, the way the dependencies are listed and everything. Like, it's such a great experience, and I've heard very few people complain about it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. Last question on Create Expo Stack that I have. What is up with this cool feature that you have at the beginning of the website where I can pretty much just type in my project name and go through all this, and then it spits me out a zip file? What is that?
This is kind of a funny story. In the beginning of January of this year, I was hanging out with some friends, and I've been thinking about renaming Create Expo Stack, or just sort of to really drive home that idea that this product is meant for rapid iteration, and ShipRN would be, so could you convey that in the name brand, right? Where like one is like RN Start and the other one's like RN Pro or something like this. And while searching through domain names, I came across rn.new. And I was like, how has no one taken this, And so I think it was like $490, which is even further confusing. And I didn't know anything about domain registry, like rules or anything like this. So I just kind of impulse bought it, right? Like on the spot. Then I find out later that day, in fact, that there's actually a rule with .new domains, which I'm not sure if you know about.
Mm-mm.
If you have a .new, you'll notice with any .new domain you've ever been to, docs.new, sheets.new, playlist.new, they all lead to a part of some company that is oriented around some action, right? So playlist.new is going to take you to Spotify, like create a playlist. Sheets.new and docs.new are going to take you to Google Sheets, Google Docs to create a new document, right? And this is actually required. Within the first 100 days, you have to stand this up. And if you don't, they'll take it away from you. And that's it.
Wow.
Yeah. So kind of crazy. I didn't know this. And so as soon as I find out, step one, punt the problem to 100 days from now because future Dan's going to figure that out, right? Current Dan is too much to worry about. But the whole time I'm thinking, what on earth could we do that would satisfy this requirement? And I'm mulling it over, and it occurs to me, all right, wild idea. The CLI, which was a GIF, which if you go to the mobile website is still, in fact, a GIF because this stuff doesn't work on mobile. What if it was interactive, right? Rather than just a recording, what if you could actually interact with the CLI? And so I start playing around with the concept and I come across Clack. And turns out clack.cc has a demo of this, right? Their website. And thanks go out to Nexel, who's on the T3 team. I talked to him a lot about inspiration for different things. And so I just started like digging around in this website, clack.cc, like how do I do this? How does this all work? And I sort of let that sink in for a while and forgot about it. And literally a week before the deadline, so we're talking not too long ago, I get an email from Google saying, hey, you've run out of time. You have a week and we're going to take this away from you. And I'm freaking out. And I'm like, stop everything. Like everyone on the team, everyone at the agency, this is the only thing that matters now. I refuse to have lost $500. This is our primary objective. We have to figure out how to do this. And so the whole group just goes into like hackathon mode, right? Like heads down, peach rings, Red Bull, insanity ensues. And we stand it up and we get it working. The server that it runs on is in fact one of the guys like at home servers, right? So that's what's doing the actual logic of like delivering that zip file. So it was just this hilariously like procrastinated thing that sort of happened pseudo accidentally. And then when I launched it, people loved it. Like people absolutely were blown away by it. They're like, this is incredible. Very serendipitous. Really not planned at all.
That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to link in the show notes to Clack. Clack is something I've not come across, and I think it's a pretty cool tool.
Oh, it's great. It's beautiful. The interface for it from a development experience is phenomenal. Highly, highly recommend it.
Cool. Well, I think a flag that you have in here that sounds like is your product also is NativeWind.
NativeWind UI.
NativeWind UI. So there we go. There's a difference there. Tell me more.
So NativeWind is a project maintained by Mark Lawler over at Expo. Mm-hmm. It's, in fact, I think the project that got him into Expo. They were originally going to sort of integrate it. And from my conversations with Charlie, it seems like there's an interest to do that sometime in the future. They're just spread super thin right now. But it is a way to use Tailwind in React Native, right? I looked at this and I was like, this is great. I love Tailwind. I love it on web. I love to use it. However, there's this other thing that Tailwind Labs released that is very useful alongside Tailwind, which we all know, Tailwind UI. And that allows you to just quickly throw together stuff using this Tailwind interface. And at least at the very beginning of your project, when you haven't quite settled on what your thing is going to look like, use this. Use these like primitive components, basically. And I thought, that's great. Why don't we have that on mobile? And there's this whole discussion about native this and native feeling, and I mean, there's a whole workshop about it at the upcoming Chain React, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So I just set out to build basically Tailwind UI, but for React Native. And several months ago, I looked into, does NativeWindUI.com exist? Is it available? And it was, so I bought it instantaneously. And this is one of the...
sense a trend, Dan.
Yeah, this is literally my pattern, right? I think NativeWindUI.com is the only example, or one of the only examples where buying the domain beforehand was a really good idea as a preemptive strike, right, of a project that would come to be. And I have this whole pattern about how I go to build things out that's sort of aligned with game design to a certain extent to ensure that people want to keep, using it, and otherwise I have to kind of like ditch it along the way. So NativeWind UI is in month 3 of a 6-month development cycle that it should see through because the interest has been there. Just in pre-order, this product was at 2K last month and 4K this past month. So once it actually releases, I anticipate that going higher by quite a bit. But it's me and the guy behind React Native Reusables, Zach Nugent, who's phenomenal, absolutely incredible to work with. And yeah, we just build out a number of components, a bunch of which are available for free right now at nativewindui.com. And then the paid components, which are available once you pay, similar to Tailwind UI. And in fact, there is a discount code for Infinite Red folks, and it's just Infinite. So if you just type in Infinite in the checkout thing, you'll get like $100 off. Otherwise, it's $2.99.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So people seem to really like it, though. It's like bringing that same kind of level of fidelity. It renders Android on Android. It renders like iOS on iOS. Makes the bridge where necessary, and otherwise everything is styled with Tailwind.
That's cool. Yeah. I think a lot of this stuff that I've noticed recently with like component libraries and all, it's once you have a well-maintained package, right? It's kind of like the whole theory going back behind why our Expo package is so good. It's because they have a team behind it that's maintaining it, and the quality you're getting out of it, right? And that's just what it sounds like here with NativeWind UI that you and your team are doing, which is great. And I'm just looking at the website. There's some cool components that I feel like everyone that's listening has built many, many, many a times, and is probably fed up of building over and over. Like speaking from myself here at this point. Specifically date picker. Never fun to have to redo that.
Oh, that one's
times.
rough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The paid version includes like entire pages, right? So it's more of like a Swift UI feel. Once you have the paid version, you can get the entire screens. You can even do that V0 kind of approach where you're copying specific components out of the page. But yeah, that what you're seeing there now is just literally what comes for free. Like it's open sourced also, so folks can work on it if they'd like to. And yeah,
that's awesome. Cool. I know we're running low on time here, but I know you wanted to mention Plugin Pro.
Oh,
do you mind telling me a little bit about what that is?
So Plugin Pro is the next product to come out. It focuses on Expo config plugins, and my experiences and experiences of a lot of other like advanced Expo React Native developers. There's a lot of fear that goes into building out, and fear and pain that go into building out config plugins. Whether you know what you're doing, whether you don't know what you're doing, it really doesn't have to be that way. The API is a little bit primitive and takes a while to sort of grok. What we've done, myself and Andrew Levy, who's behind React Native Swift UI, or is it Swift UI React Native? We have made a platform that serves as a discovery tool to find config plugins, as well as extend them, but also to construct and maintain them. Rather than having to write the code yourself, you can actually just drag these sort of like blocks of code, like modify pod file, right? Or modify this, and then once you have all the blocks in place, you just hit the generate config plugin button and it'll show it to you, right? Like the code, and you can just copy and paste that directly into your code base. If you'd rather go another approach, you can implement, right? You can create a new branch of your existing project, go to the iOS library that you want to add to your project, add all the changes per the README file, and then use our tool to basically reverse generate based off of the PBX file, a config plugin, saving yourself literally, I mean, in the case of Frank, 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So the goal here was, how do we build a product that will take something from weeks or months of work and reduce it down to a couple of hours? And so that's what Plugin Pro is. That's going to be more of a subscription model, as it's going to be more actively utilized. But I'm really hoping in the initial work we're doing here, of converting our existing plugins and just battle testing it with early users, I'm really hoping that it reduces the pain and the fear associated with the current Expo config plugin ecosystem.
Yeah. It's funny you say that there at the end, the fear of the Expo plugin world. It can be very intimidating to get into, but as more and more people embrace full Expo, continuous integration Expo, it's more and more becoming needed to understand how these work and making sure that you understand how it works under the hood so that you can explain it or
it's how you do the
continue to build it. Exactly.
Yeah, it's how you do the most impressive stuff in React Native and Expo is by extending this native functionality. So yeah, I like to find the areas of that sort of highest activation energy, try to lower it by an order of magnitude. Like, where are those opportunities, and how can I build them then? Like, what does that look like incrementally, right? 1 week, second week, what do I have to deliver? How do I test whether this is like something that people really, really want? Mm-hmm. And once that gets past like 2-3 months of building in that way, that's when I really tend to have a lot of conviction in this is something that people are really going to get jazzed about. They're going to have that aha moment, Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me today. This was a lot of fun and enlightening, and I'm excited for the products you have kind of coming out soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I always love chatting with you guys. Looking forward to Chain React,
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
As always, thanks to our production team, with editor Todd Worth, our assistant editor, this guy, Jed Bartosky, our director of communications and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Our producer and host is Jamin Holmgren, and executive producers and hosts are Robin Hines and Mazen Shami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio wherever you get your podcasts. And leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you think.